When a beloved police officer was found dead in the freezing snow, the town of Canton, Massachusetts, demanded swift justice. They thought they knew the villain, Karen Red, the woman who loved him. But behind the chilling headlines, buried beneath a web of loyalty, fear, and silence, was a darker truth. One that would shatter lives, expose corruption, and turn a tight-knit community against itself. This isn't just a story about a crime. It's a story about what happens when the ones sworn to protect justice may be the ones who bury it.
Welcome to The Silent Witness, where we highlight true crime news, unsolved mysteries, unfold chilling stories and events around us to educate and provide information on how we can stay proactive, informed, be security and safety conscious in our environment. The Silent Witness is your go-to destination for gripping accounts of real-life crimes, missing persons, cold cases, and unexplained events. Want to support us and appreciate our craft? Click like, comment, and hit the subscribe button now. Please note that all related materials referenced in this video were majorly sourced from either official court or police documents, reference statements, or other reputable sources, weeding out the speculation theories and unverified information.
It was the kind of cold that scraped the bones. A January night in Canton, Massachusetts, where the snow settled thick like silence and the streets wore an eerie stillness. Karen Reed sat in her car, staring at the spot where she dropped off her boyfriend, Boston police officer John O'Keefe, hours earlier. But now he was gone, and something inside her had begun to twist. She called his phone again. No answer. The night was slipping into morning, and worry had metastasized into panic. She circled the neighborhood again, headlights sweeping across snowbanks and dark windows, until finally, a shape, a body, lying still in the snow outside 34 Fairview Road. It was John. Karen screamed. But let's rewind. Karen Reed wasn't just any woman with a bad feeling. She was a 41-year-old equity analyst, born and raised in Mansfield, Massachusetts. A straight-A student, she worked her way through college and earned her MBA. Karen came from a family of teachers, blue-collar, humble, and tight-knit. She was known for her dry humor, her loyalty, and her fierce independence. She hadn't had the easiest time with relationships, but when she met John O'Keefe, something felt different. Real. Safe. John had a strong presence. He was calm, kind, and came with a soft spot for his niece and nephew, who he'd taken in after his sister passed away. Karen admired that about him, his family devotion, his strength in tragedy. They were opposites in many ways, but they worked. John O'Keefe, 46, had worn the Boston police badge for 16 years. He came from a long line of first responders, his father a retired firefighter, his brother a detective. John was the guy who showed up early and stayed late. He wasn't flashy, but he was steady. A man who believed in structure, in doing the right thing. After his sister died, he became the legal guardian of her 2 kids, throwing himself into the role with the same commitment he brought to his work. His life had turned into quiet routines, school runs, soccer games, late-night paperwork. Karen brought light to his world. She teased him out of his seriousness, made him laugh, gave him something to look forward to. On January 28, 2022, they had planned a night out. A few drinks, a stop by a house party in Canton hosted by John's friends, fellow officers, and their spouses. Karen wasn't keen on going. She didn't know them well and had felt, in the past, a certain coldness from that group. But she went anyway for John. And that's when the night started to blur. Karen would later tell police that John asked to be dropped off at the party, but she wasn't feeling well, so she went home. But she never heard from him after. Hours passed. Calls went unanswered. And by morning he was dead. The first responders found John unresponsive in the snow, bruised, bleeding, with injuries to his head and arms. His hat and glasses were found nearby. But here's where the story splintered. Prosecutors said Karen hit him with her SUV, backed into him while drunk, then left him to die in the cold. She was charged with second-degree murder, manslaughter while operating under the influence, and leaving the scene of a deadly accident. But Karen insisted she was innocent, and what came next would pull the entire town into a tornado of suspicion, politics, backroom loyalties, and damning contradictions. Because this wasn't just about one death, it was about what people chose to believe. Canton wasn't the kind of town where scandals made the evening news. It was close-knit, polite, the kind of place where neighbors waved, and everything felt just a little bit safer because you assumed everyone was looking out for each other. But as the Karen Red case began to unravel, that comforting surface started to crack. Karen Reed's arrest made immediate headlines. A successful, educated woman accused of killing a police officer in a drunk driving accident was already the kind of headline that screamed for national attention. But this wasn't just any officer. This was John O'Keefe, a beloved fixture of the Boston PD. And the woman accused wasn't just some stranger. She was his girlfriend, the very last person he was seen with. From the beginning, Karen maintained that she was being framed, or at the very least, that the narrative had twisted wildly away from the truth. And that's where things got strange. John's injuries, for one, didn't fully align with being hit by a car. Forensic experts brought in by the defense noted bruises inconsistent with a vehicle strike, lacerations around the eyes, marks that looked more like he had been beaten, not struck. And the house, 34 Fairview Road, where the party was held, was full of off-duty officers. People who knew John, people who knew Karen. Yet no one claimed to see anything. No one heard a thud. No security camera footage was released from that night. Neighbors said the area was too quiet, too staged. Then there was the snowplow. Hours after Karen dropped John off, a plow came through the neighborhood. Prosecutors claimed it had buried John's body beneath more snow, but Karen's defense team argued it had also destroyed crucial evidence. Tire tracks, footprints, blood. The timeline grew murky. The narrative began to splinter, and behind it all were the families. The O'Keefe family was devastated. John's brother, also a member of law enforcement, publicly supported the prosecution. Their grief was raw and loud. They stood by the charges, demanded justice. But Karen's family? They closed ranks. Her father and her sister both fought back against the narrative. They insisted Karen was being railroaded, caught in a political storm fueled by internal police dynamics. They believed she was being made into a scapegoat. It became clear this wasn't just a trial about a woman and a man. It was a trial about truth, who owned it, who could distort it, and who had the power to enforce it. As the trial date approached, whispers turned into roars. Online forums lit up. Supporters of Karen launched hashtags. Conspiracy theories bloomed, some absurd, others chillingly plausible. And in the middle of it all stood Karen Red, a woman once defined by her career, now drowning in suspicion. But beneath the legal jargon, beneath the media frenzy, two families had been torn open, one grieving a son, another defending a daughter. And somewhere in the snow-covered silence of that January night, the truth waited. The courtroom was packed. Cameras, journalists, and community members filled the wooden benches, buzzing with anticipation. Karen Red stood with her legal team, dressed in a simple dark blazer, her face pale but composed. Her attorney, Alan Jackson, a former LA County prosecutor with a sharp eye for inconsistencies, was ready to pull apart the case thread by thread, and he began with one question. If Karen Red had truly hit John O'Keefe with her SUV, Where was the blood? Where was the damage to the car that lined up with the story? The prosecution had painted a picture of reckless drunkenness, of a woman so impaired and angry that she reversed into her boyfriend and left him to freeze to death. But the evidence was messy. The taillight from Karen's SUV was found in the snow, yes, but so were conflicting sets of footprints. Forensic expert after forensic expert took the stand, some supporting the idea of vehicular impact, others raising doubts.
Same location,
and then came the cell
generally
phone
it was in
data.
between the flagpole and the fire hydrant. The sneaker was flush up against the curb and it was upside down. I think we had found one piece of taillight prior to the sneaker, and then after we found the sneaker, we found a few more additional pieces of taillight. The sneaker was completely buried. It wasn't until we started digging through the snow that we found the sneaker.
Was a clear piece of plastic found a few feet south of the black sneaker, which was found 3 feet south of the red piece of plastic? Did that happen?
I don't know the distance, sir. No, not without measuring it. But I wouldn't think it was that far of a distance. They were much closer than that.
Right. I mean, you say you don't know the distance, but you testified to what the distance was in that prior proceeding, did you not?
Objection.
And then, moving along, we have the red piece of plastic, 3 feet south, black sneaker, a few feet south, clear plastic, then finally, several feet south of that clear piece of plastic, was there a second piece of red plastic found, several feet south?
No, again, I don't agree with your description of the.
Involved in a hit and run, so I was requested to examine it for biological material. I was informed that the victim had scratches on his arm, as well as the fact that the car had been towed through a blizzard. I performed blood screening on the lower lying areas of the undercarriage, on each side of the tire flap, as well as the edge of the bumper and the exhaust pipe.
And what were the results of that testing that you performed there in the garage?
Those were negative. I observed the apparent glass on the rear bumper.
Are you able to tell from your examination of those fibers and of those clothing materials sort of what caused those tears and cuts?
No. As far as the sneakers, given their dark color, I did not see any visible red-brown stains on the black area of the sneakers, so I used an alternate light source to aid in visualizing any potential blood on those sneakers. With that alternate light source, I tested several stains on the sneakers, one of which screened positive for blood.
With respect to the other clothing items that you were talking about doing the screening test and the confirmatory test for blood, with respect to the gray sweatshirt, the orange t-shirt, and the jeans, what were the results of that screening test and that confirmatory test that you ran with regard to each of those?
The screening test and the confirmatory test were positive.
With regard to the pieces that you had sort of put together, what, if anything, were you able to do with regard to some of those pieces and the tail light housing, item 3-1?
From those items that we just saw, I was able to piece one larger piece with many of those pieces all fit together into one piece that I then called piece one. There were some other pieces that also fit together among those question ones that I called pieces 2, piece 3, piece 4, and piece 5. Piece 1 was a physical
Want
match.
to support us and appreciate our craft? Click like, comment, and hit the subscribe button now.
Sure, you can have a seat. I'll remind you you're still in your room.
Or stand, however you're most comfortable today. Just do whatever you need to do, okay?
Thank you, Your Honor. Good morning, everyone.
Sir, yesterday we talked about downloading phones and making what you called extractions.
Yes.
And from that data, you could create different types of reports.
So have Detective Guarino say his name again, please.
I'm sorry. Again, for the record, could you introduce yourself to the jury and spell your last name for the record?
Yeah. Good morning. My name is Nicholas Guarino, G-U-A, R-I-N-O.
Thank you.
Sir, you mentioned yesterday that you downloaded a number of phones, or you were involved in the process of downloading a number of phones.
That's correct.
You explained to us that after you have the data analyzed, you can pinpoint certain items that you may want to put in a document.
Yes, so the extractions into a program of our choosing, Cellbrite is the most commonly used, and then we can take call logs or text messages, any information that the investigator is looking for.
When you downloaded Mr. O'Keefe's phone and you downloaded the defendant's phone, did you try to create, or did you create a report through Cellbrite, the software, that would show you all of Mr. O'Keefe's call logs?
Yes, I did.
And when I use the term call logs, what does that mean?
The call logs are the calls that the phone receives.
How do you create a report from Cellbrite? Can you just walk us through that process briefly?
Yep, so in the program, you can go in and select the calls from it and export it into different formats, PDF, XML, HTML, or you can create a portable case and extract them all as a portable case that we would see on my computer.
May I approach, Your Honor?
Yes.
Showing you a document of Mr. O'Keefe's call logs. Do you recognize that?
Yes.
And what is it?
It is the call logs. Just want to make sure it's between John O'Keefe and the defendant from, just want to see the dates, the 28th, January 28th, 2022 to January 29th, 2022.
Would this contain all the phone calls from his phone data, of the calls between those two parties that night?
Yes, that's what I created.
I'd like to move this as an exhibit, please.
Okay. So,
If I could, Your Honor, just want to compare to make sure we got the same.
okay.
Thank you, Mr. Brennan. Thank you, Mr. Brennan.
Okay.
Thank you, Your Honor. Consent.
Okay.
No objection.
You captured all of the phone calls between two parties on that last document. Can you also do that with chats?
Yes, that is true.
And did you do that in this case?
Yes, I did.
Did you create a document of chats between the phones of the defendant and Mr. O'Keefe for after midnight, for the evening hours of January 29, 2002?
Yes, I did.
May I approach?
Yes.
I'm good.
You recognize that document, sir?
Yes, I do.
And can you tell us what that is?
These are the texts from the defendant to John O'Keefe. Yes.
For January 29, 2022?
Yes, that's correct. I'm sorry.
Okay. I'd move this as an exhibit, Your Honor.
Okay.
No objection, Your Honor.
Thank you.
Did you identify or specify chat messages between John O'Keefe and a person named Jen McCabe?
Yes, I did.
Did you create a Cellbrite report?
Yes, I did.
May I approach?
Yes.
Can we have just a brief moment, please?
It's sidebar?
No, no.
Just the two of
Compare what we have.
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Wright. You're welcome.
Sir, I'm handing you a document. Do you recognize it?
Yes. This is the text message between John O'Keefe and Jen McCabe on 29th on January 29th, 2022.
And this is through a search of Cellbrite. You match their data, pull up all of their conversations.
Yes, that's
By
correct.
chat.
Yes.
Okay. I move to introduce this, please, Your Honor.
No objection, Your Honor.
Similarly to the chats, did you do the same with calls between Mr. O'Keefe and Ms. McCabe?
Yes, I did.
May I approach, Your Honor?
Yes.
Showing you a document, sir. Do you recognize that document?
Yes, this is the call log between John O'Keefe and Jen McCabe for, just want to make sure I get all the dates correct, just for January 29th, 2022.
I think you have evidence, Your Honor.
Okay.
No objection, Your Honor.
Did you do a file extraction and a report on all chats between the phones of John O'Keefe and the defendant for a period of time?
Yes, I did.
May I approach, Your Honor?
Yes.
Handing you a document. Do you recognize that document?
Yes, this is the text messages between John O'Keefe and the defendant from January 28th to January 29th, 2022.
Thank you. Your Honor, move this into evidence.
Okay. Mr. Alessi?
No objection, Your Honor.
All right. Thank you.
Did you have an opportunity to make a report from some of the data from the defendant's phone from January 29, 2022?
What are you referring? I did make some reports from the defendant's phone.
What's a call log report?
Again, the call log report is the calls that the party makes to another phone. So it's going to show everyone they've called or attempted to call.
May I approach, Your Honor?
Yes.
ask you to take a look at this document. Do you recognize it?
Yes.
And could you tell the jury what it is?
It's the call log from the defendant's phone for January 29th, 2022. It looks like everyone she called.
Introduce this as an exhibit, please.
No objection, Your Honor.
Thank you.
Exhibit 28.
What we just introduced into evidence is the entire call log of calls to anybody and everybody to and from for that period of time.
Yes.
That's fair to say?
Yes, that's correct.
And then can you further isolate calls between just two parties?
Yes, you can. You can search by phone number or name.
And did you do that with the defendant's records for some parties?
Yes, I did.
Did you isolate phone calls between the defendant and Mr. McCabe for the evening of January 29, 2022?
Yes, I did.
May I approach?
Yes.
Guys, take a look at this document. Do you recognize it?
Yes, I do.
What is it?
It's the phone calls from the defendant and Jennifer McCabe, January 29th, 2022.
Thank you. Your Honor, I'd like to move this into evidence, please.
No objection, Your Honor.
All right, thank you.
Exhibit 29.
Did you isolate calls between the defendant and Ms. Roberts for the night of January 29, 22?
Yes, I did.
Can I see the last exhibit, please? Thank you, sir. I'd ask you to take a look at that document. Do you recognize it?
Yes, I do.
Could you share with the jury what it is?
Yep. It's the call logs between the defendant and Carrie Roberts for January 29th, 2022. Yes.
And that's a report you created?
Yes, it is.
Your Honor, I move this into evidence, please.
No objection, Your Honor.
Okay, thank you.
Exhibit 30.
Did you have an opportunity to isolate and produce a report for all chats between the defendant and Ms. Roberts for the night of January 29, 2022?
Yes, I did.
May I approach, Your Honor?
Yes.
Sir, I'm handing you a document. Do you recognize that?
Yes.
And could you share with the jury what that is?
This is text messages between the defendant and Carrie Roberts on January 29th, 2022.
Thank you. I would move this into evidence, please.
No objection, Your Honor.
Okay. Jurors, this is the way we have to put evidence in cases in Massachusetts, okay?
Exhibit 31.
Sir, do you have an opportunity to identify a text message or a chat between the defendant and a person by the name of Ingrid on the morning of January 29th, 2022?
Yes, I did.
May I approach?
Yes.
Take a look at this document. Do you recognize it?
Yes.
Could you tell the jury what that is?
Yes, this is a text conversation between the defendant and looks like a group chat between Ingrid Curtis and Bill Curtis.
Did you make that report?
Yes. This is on January 29, 2022.
Thank you. I move this into evidence, please.
No objection, Your Honor.
Thank you.
Exhibit 32.
If the this is a good time, if Your Honor would permit.
Okay. Jurors, what we're going to do is we will take our morning recess now, and we'll take 20 minutes to a half an hour, and we'll see you then.
Karen's phone showed multiple attempts to contact John that night. Calls, texts. The last one, a message sent in panic, read, "John, where are you? Please answer." Alan Jackson pulled up the timeline, second by second. He argued that Karen's actions that night didn't reflect someone who had committed a crime and tried to hide it. They reflected panic, confusion, and fear. But more than anything, he aimed his sights on the party at 34 Fairview Road. Who was really in that house? Witnesses testified that the host of the party was Brian Albert, a fellow Boston police officer. Others present included off-duty cops and their partners. But strangely, almost none of them remembered seeing John O'Keefe enter the home. No one could definitively say what time he arrived, or if he stayed long. Some even contradicted each other's testimonies. The timeline frayed. The air in the courtroom grew thick. Then came the surprise. A former neighbor stepped forward. She claimed she saw lights outside the house that night. Movement near the side yard around 12:30 a.m. Not long after Karen claimed she dropped John off. But her account hadn't been included in the original investigation. When asked why, she simply said, "No one ever interviewed me." That revelation cracked something open. If witnesses were being overlooked, if stories weren't being corroborated, what else had slipped through the cracks? To understand what led Karen to this moment, we must go back. Karen Reed was born and raised in a tight-knit community in Massachusetts. Her father, Thomas Reed, a retired firefighter, and her mother, Evelyn, a schoolteacher, were respected members of their neighborhood. Karen was the youngest of three and always the most spirited. She pursued a career in finance, earning her MBA and eventually working as a respected financial analyst. She was known for her wit, her independence, and her loyalty to friends and family. But life hadn't always been smooth. Karen had endured a difficult breakup years earlier, and in her mid-40s, she was just beginning to let her guard down when she met John O'Keefe. John was a decorated Boston police officer, known for his dedication to community policing and mentoring young recruits. He had lost both his sister and one of his parents under tragic circumstances, and had taken in his young niece and nephew to raise as his own. To friends and colleagues, he was the picture of compassion and strength. But behind closed doors, John carried the weight of his past. The loss of his family had changed him. Some said it made him more empathetic. Others that it made him guarded. When he met Karen, there was an instant connection. Both were older, both had lived through pain, and both were searching for something steady. Karen's family sat in the front row every day. Her father, Thomas Reed, wore the same blue tie each morning, a quiet symbol of consistency amid chaos. Her mother wept silently during the more graphic testimonies. Her sister, Lauren, scribbled notes furiously, determined to understand every piece of this unraveling nightmare. The Reeds weren't just fighting for Karen's freedom. They were fighting for their legacy, their name. John's family, too, was present. His niece and nephew, now in their teens, sat with John's cousin Brian, a fellow officer. They listened intently as the story of that night was replayed, frame by frame, in the courtroom. For them, John was a hero, a father figure, a protector. The idea that someone so close to him, someone he trusted, could be responsible for his death was unthinkable. But so was the idea that others might be hiding something. And then the power shift began. Karen's defense team introduced their own expert, a former forensic pathologist with 3 decades of experience. He testified that John's injuries were not consistent with being struck by a reversing vehicle. There were wounds to the side and back of the head, yes, but they were blunt force trauma, not crushing injuries. And his clothing? Unsoiled, clean, as if he had been placed in the snow, not thrown into it. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. And that's when the defense went further. They suggested that John had made it inside the house that night, that something happened inside, an argument, perhaps a confrontation, that he may have been assaulted, that, for reasons unknown, his body was then moved outside. The implication was devastating. It suggested a cover-up, not just by individuals but potentially by the system itself. Officers protecting their own. A thin blue line thicker than truth. The prosecution scrambled. They leaned into the known facts, the taillight, the texts, the alcohol. But the momentum had shifted, and Karen's defense capitalized on it. One of the most chilling moments came when they played Karen's 911 call. Her voice cracked with fear and horror. "I think I hit him. I don't know what happened. Oh my God." Prosecutors claimed it was a confession. The defense claimed it was confusion. The jury sat still, hanging on every syllable. And then came the cross-examination of the lead investigator. Alan Jackson grilled him on the timeline, on the handling of evidence, on the refusal to test other areas for blood. Why, he asked, was Karen's SUV combed for evidence but not the house where the party took place? Why weren't the other attendees' clothes tested? Why did the investigation stop at Karen? The officer stammered. The room fell silent. Outside the courthouse, supporters of Karen held signs that read, "Justice for all," and "Investigate everyone." Meanwhile, others stood on the opposite sidewalk with photos of John, calling for Karen to be held accountable. The town was fractured. Friendships were ending. Families divided. Canton had become a battlefield of belief. But inside that courtroom, one thing became clear. The truth wasn't simple. And the snow outside 34 Fairview Road had covered more than just a body. It had buried something much deeper. The courtroom buzzed with speculation after the forensic testimony, but it was the digital trail that would further append the narrative. Karen Reed's defense team subpoenaed the cell phone data from all key witnesses, including those who attended the party at 34 Fairview Road the night John O'Keefe died. What they found raised eyebrows. Gaps in communication, delayed texts, sudden battery shutdowns. Particularly, the phones belonging to Brian Albert and another officer showed periods of no activity that directly overlapped with the crucial early morning window when John is believed to have died. To the defense, this wasn't just coincidence. It hinted at intentional silencing, deletion, or worse, deliberate tampering. But what brought a deeper chill wasn't the data. It was the call logs. At 12:42 a.m., one of the phones pinged a tower not far from the woods behind the house. Not the front driveway where Karen allegedly dropped John off. Why would someone be back there? What were they doing? That night, temperatures had dropped below 20 degrees. John's body was found face up in the snow, but without the expected abrasions or injuries from being hit by a car. And now, the digital evidence hinted at movement, at activity behind the home. It was as if a ghost had moved through the trees, hiding something in plain sight. The judge allowed the GPS data into evidence, and the tension in the room grew thicker with each point plotted on the screen. But the prosecution tried to refocus. They brought forward a forensic engineer who claimed that damage to Karen's Lexus was consistent with hitting a human body. They showed crash test simulations and diagrams. But it was the cross-examination that punctured their argument. Alan Jackson stepped forward and asked, "Where's the blood?" No blood on the vehicle. No hair. No skin cells. Just a broken taillight, and even that had edges that looked as if they'd been handled, possibly broken off manually. Then came the testimony of a man named Tom Fitzgerald, an off-duty EMT who lived near the Albert residence. He told the court that around 1 a.m., he heard arguing near the side of the house. It was muffled, like people were trying not to be loud, but someone said, "We can't call this in yet." He never reported it until now. He said fear of police retaliation kept him quiet. The defense leaned in. This was more than a story about one woman's guilt or innocence. It was about an ecosystem that discouraged truth in the name of unity. An unspoken code that punished whistleblowers and protected insiders. John O'Keefe's family looked shaken. His niece, now 15, clutched her cousin's hand. For them, the idea that John had been left to die by his peers was soul-crushing. But so was the thought that his girlfriend, someone he loved, might be innocent. Their grief had no safe direction to flow. They were caught in the storm of ambiguity, of layered loyalties. Karen's family, meanwhile, had begun hiring independent experts to reconstruct that night. A weather specialist testified that the snowfall that evening had left distinct tracks. And those tracks, photographed by crime scene technicians, seemed to show more than one person had approached John's body after he fell, or was placed, into the snow. One set of footprints came from the rear of the house, another from the driveway. But only Karen's prints were analyzed in the report. The others, ignored. The courtroom held its breath again when the defense brought in a new witness, a local mail carrier named Cheryl Adams. She had delivered to 34 Fairview Road for over 10 years and claimed she saw security cameras on the property. Cameras not mentioned in any police report. When asked what happened to the footage, prosecutors shifted uncomfortably. "We were told it didn't exist," they replied. "The system was inactive." But Cheryl remembered seeing the red light blinking just days before the incident. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Enough to seed doubt. Alan Jackson's closing argument in this phase was brutal and unflinching. He turned toward the jury and asked, "If this were your daughter or your sister or your mother, would this investigation be enough for you?" He paused. "Would you stop looking?" Silence. The tide was turning, but the war wasn't over. The prosecution doubled down, painting Karen as manipulative, calculating. They played her 911 call again and again. They zoomed in on her texts that night. But something was missing. The motive. Why would Karen kill John O'Keefe? What had she to gain? There was no history of violence. No signs of growing resentment. The narrative felt forced, like trying to squeeze a square peg into a round hole. And then came the biggest twist yet. A private investigator, hired by Karen's family, discovered that one of the lead detectives on the case had close family ties to one of the party attendees, a cousin. The connection hadn't been disclosed, and that detective had been in charge of collecting the evidence from 34 Fairview Road. The defense pounced. Conflict of interest, biased investigation, suppressed leads. They filed a motion to bring it all into the open. Outside the courthouse, the media went wild. What had started as a story about a tragic accident had morphed into a saga of potential corruption, betrayal, and cover-up. Canton, Massachusetts, was now the epicenter of a national conversation about truth, loyalty, and justice. As the trial paused for a week-long recess, Karen sat silently beside her attorney. Her eyes were heavy but resolute. The storm hadn't passed, but for the first time in months, there was a breeze of possibility, of truth clawing its way through the ice. When court resumed the following week, the atmosphere had shifted dramatically. It was no longer a simple criminal case. It was a referendum on a system that might have failed everyone involved. The defense came prepared to pull the final thread. They introduced a bombshell, a whistleblower from inside the Canton Police Department. The individual, whose identity was kept confidential for their safety, claimed that crucial pieces of evidence had either been altered or disregarded at the request of high-ranking officials. These claims weren't just whispered rumors anymore. They came with screenshots, time-stamped memos, and internal emails that suggested a coordinated effort to steer the investigation toward Karen Red. The courtroom went silent as the whistleblower's attorney read a statement. "My client came forward not out of allegiance to Karen Red, but out of allegiance to the truth. What happened to John O'Keefe was a tragedy. But what followed was a cover-up." Karen's face, usually stoic, showed visible emotion for the first time. Her eyes welled with tears as the statement continued, detailing how the initial scene was allegedly contaminated before the forensics team arrived, how security footage may have been erased before investigators ever asked for it, and how one officer allegedly remarked, "We're going to make this stick to her." That single quote echoed through the courthouse like a gunshot. The jury sat frozen. The prosecution's lead attorney, sweating under the pressure, tried to object, but the damage had been done. The narrative was collapsing. What had once been a straightforward accusation was now a full-blown institutional scandal. And just when the courtroom thought it couldn't get any more surreal, the defense played a 20-second voicemail that Karen had received anonymously. The voice was disguised, but the message was clear. "You were never supposed to find him. Not there. Not like that. Karen's lawyer turned to the jury. That body wasn't where she left him. It was where someone else wanted him found. The emotional toll was immense. John O'Keefe's family had to grapple with the possibility that their trust in the justice system might have led them to demonize the wrong person. Karen's family, worn and weary, sat quietly in the second row, holding each other's hands. Outside the courthouse, protesters had shifted tone. Signs that once read "Justice for John" now shared space with others that said, "Investigate the investigators." The final blow came from a digital forensic expert who analyzed John O'Keefe's own phone. The GPS data showed a brief, unaccounted stop between the bar and 34 Fairview Road. A stop no one could explain. A location that, according to the expert, overlapped with the backyard of another officer's home. A home with no video surveillance and no witnesses ever called to testify. The defense laid out their theory. Karen had dropped John off at the front. Something happened inside that party, an argument, a confrontation. John, possibly intoxicated and emotional, ended up in the backyard. A scuffle broke out. Maybe it was an accident. Maybe it wasn't. But instead of calling 911, panic set in. They moved him, staged the scene, and pinned it on the woman least likely to be protected, Karen read. The prosecution's final rebuttal was hollow. They repeated the same pieces of evidence already picked apart. They cast doubt on the whistleblower's motives. But the spell had broken. The courtroom could feel it. The jury deliberated for 4 days. And on the 5th, they returned with a verdict. Not guilty. Karen collapsed into her attorney's arms. Tears flowed freely. Outside, cheers erupted. Not just for her acquittal, but for the unraveling of what many now saw as a miscarriage of justice. In the weeks that followed, state officials opened an independent investigation into the Canton Police Department. Several officers were placed on leave. A special commission was formed to examine the integrity of the original investigation. And in the midst of it all, Karen Reed quietly left Massachusetts to rebuild her life in anonymity. The life lesson? Justice isn't always clean. It's not always timely. And sometimes, it requires the courage of outsiders to challenge the very institutions meant to protect it. But in the end, truth has a way of surfacing, even through snow, silence, and scandal.